Hi, everybody. So we are here to talk about the first released Star Wars film, the one that was known as Star Wars for many years, and now it is, I guess, officially titled Star Wars Episode 4, The New Hope. And I have with me today, as usual, I have Abby and Jeremy. You guys just want to say hi real quick?
Hi.
Yeah, there's Jeremy. All right,
Yeah.
great. Okay, just like I've done in the past, I did write up a little summary. So I'm going to read that, and I don't have as many. I have the Q&A up again, so I'm going to try that again. So if anybody is watching or joins in, feel free to submit a question. And this one's a lot more. It's a lot simpler. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. But here is the summary for Episode 4. The original Star Wars Episode 4 starts 19 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith. The galaxy is split up into two groups, Rebels and the larger Galactic Empire. At the opening, a rebel Princess Leia has stolen plans to the Death Star in R2-D2. Leia is captured, but she sends R2 and C-3PO to Tatooine to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. Next, we meet Luke Skywalker, who is anxious to get out of his uncle's simple farm life. Luke purchases the droids and sees the message from Leia to Obi-Wan. They end up meeting Obi-Wan, and Luke learns about the days of the Jedi, the Force, and Darth Vader, who studied under Obi-Wan and killed Luke's father. Luke is also given his father's lightsaber. After viewing the message, Obi-Wan decides to go to Alderaan and visit with Leia's father. Luke decides to go with him only after he finds his uncle and aunt have been burned alive by Imperial stormtroopers, looking for the droids. To get to Alderaan, they hire the cynical pilot Han Solo and Chewbacca, who fly the Millennium Falcon. Meanwhile, Grand Moff Tarkin decides to make a show of force to Leia and the other rebels and destroys the entire planet of Alderaan in one massive shot. The Millennium Falcon is caught by the Death Star, and Han, Luke, Obi-Wan, and the droids stage a rescue for Leia. However, things go wrong as they are caught and end up in a trash compactor where they narrowly escape being crushed alive. Then they escape, but not before Obi-Wan and Vader duel with lightsabers and Obi-Wan is killed. Luke is devastated, but they must leave. Using the plans for the Death Star, rebels discover a port that connects to the station's main reactor. They decide if they can shoot a target directly in that port, it will cause the entire Death Star to explode. Luke and a squadron join the mission, and Vader is hot on their trails. Obi-Wan's spirit helps counsel Luke to use the Force, and he is able to successfully get the shots into the port and destroy the Death Star. This kills Tarkin and weakens the Empire for the moment. Han and Luke receive medals for their bravery to end the film. So, how was that? Did I get everything?
Yep.
That's pretty good.
Okay, good. All right. So, I'll just sort of start our question of, like, how did you feel about the rewatch, about the film? And I'll just start with you, Jeremy. What did you think?
I like watching it in the context of the other films. I find it refreshing, kind of, when you hit Episode 4. The storytelling, like you said, it's just much simpler. But it's partly there's a focus there that I think the prequels generally lack. It is a pretty simple story, but again, you have a very clear story as well. You know definitely who your protagonist is throughout the story. You've got a clear villain. You've got a villain who ends up being sustained past a single movie, which helps build the intrigue and the it just helps build the story going forward. But I really enjoyed the watch.
Good. Awesome. Yeah, I agree. What about you, Abby?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I agree that it was interesting to see it in the context of the other movies. That also kind of made me a little bit disappointed that Obi-Wan died so early. Like, he feels like he should have played a larger role in these movies to me.
Yeah.
But partly because those first 3 movies are about Obi-Wan. And then this first one starts and you're like, oh, he's gone already. But yeah, it's a fun movie. It's also kind of, you know, the tape of Star Wars that runs in my head. On the one hand, it's fun to rewatch. On the other hand, it's like, how well do I know this movie? Like, every shot, every line, I know it so well. I know it better than I'd like to. So I enjoy it, but it's also like, oh, childhood memories of this rolling constantly in the background.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely see what you're saying. And as I mentioned in the last one, and I wore this shirt just to state my preference for the theatrical editions, but I won't go into that too much. But I did watch it in the theatrical editions. I'm not a fan of the special editions, and it's the first one that's truly to me like a space opera. It's the first one that you want to cheer, at least for me, that at the end, and that's fun. I remember us talking last episode about how the prequels that you'd said your brother had said, oh, they're just fun, and we were like, no, they're not. And this is the first one, I feel like, of the 4 films that's fun to me, And my next question is do you remember when you first were introduced to Star Wars? Do you have any memory of that, or you said it's kind of always been there?
Oh. I mean, I'm the youngest in my family, so my brother, we're all pretty close in age, but my oldest brother is 4 years older than I am, and I was born in '83, so I was born well after this movie was made, and I was probably born after he'd already been introduced to it. I don't know if that's when his obsession began or not, but I have no memory of being introduced to this movie.
So I as a kid, we had a couple of movies that were taped on VHS off of TV, and this was one of them. And just have memories. It's just one of those movies that we would watch, because we had it on tape. We would watch it more frequently than others, and it's just funny things you remember, like in close to the opening sequence when R2-D2 and C-3PO are first on Tatooine and they're walking through the desert there. I just remember as a kid, I thought that was the longest sequence ever, and it was probably about 3 minutes at most that they had that conversation, and they got picked up by the Jawas. And it's just funny, like, passage of time is hilarious. But then it's also a movie that as kids we would be drawn to it, and there wasn't gore or any other reason why you really shouldn't watch it. I mean, even the violence there is, it's all pretty well sci-fi, laser beams and magic swords, and as a kid, that's how you perceive it. And I just feel like it's good, clean fun, and even as small children, we were drawn to it because it was exciting, it was different.
Yeah, my sister was actually a bigger Star Wars fan than I was growing up. She actually my dad had a friend or something that owned those, like, life-size cutout company, things, and she had, I don't know, 6 or 7 Star Wars life-size cutouts in her room. She had a basement room, and so you'd walk along the hallway, and she'd have all these life-size cutouts of Star Wars. And I was not into things that were fantasy in general as a kid. I liked things that, like, I would prefer something like Little Women over something like Lord of the Rings. Like, I liked things that were felt more about regular people, but Star Wars for some reason was something that we all liked. It was just so, I think because they feel like regular people even though they're in this science fiction setting. You know, like you can relate to Luke, you can relate to, you know, to Han in a way, and so I think maybe that's part of it, is that it didn't feel too abstract for me. And so it's really hard to, I think, overstate the impact that this film had on everything. I just thought we'd talk about that for just a second at the beginning. The you know, I was talking with my mom, and she's like, I can't understand why my kids like movies so much. And I really think it comes down to Star Wars. Because before, I mean, my impression is that before Star Wars, movies were entertainment, and there was something fun. And after Star Wars, movies could become something akin to like fishing or hunting or something like that could become like practically your whole life, you know, like a hobby that you could become immersed in. And you know, that's something that I've, you know, seen, that I just can't think of any movie pre-Star Wars that had that kind. Maybe Disney, maybe, but I just can't think of anything else where it practically became a religion to some people. It was so passionate a thing. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a movie that really speaks to everybody, and I think that's where it just has a draw to people of all ages to begin with. And Episode 4, especially, it was written in a time when there was no Star Wars, and so you have George is really trying to introduce us to this world, and he's very good in this one about doing that, because he takes his character Luke, who has no knowledge of the Force. He has a vague idea of his father and what he was involved in, but you know, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru covered up most of that. And so as he's having these conversations with Obi-Wan, he's being introduced to the very basic idea of the Force and what is a Jedi and what is a lightsaber, and we're all along for this ride with him. And it's just really well done. And that's what you don't get with episodes 1 through 3, is this idea of starting at the ground level and being introduced to the world. You know, the assumption is if you watch episode 1, you've seen the others. And so I think episode 4 is just so good, and why it had such a lasting impact on society was that it was really written in a way that we were all Luke, and we were all along for this ride and wanted to see where it went. And it was just really well done in that respect.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that way, that you get kind of introduced to the world bit by bit along with Luke. That's definitely very true. Yeah, I just think it started like modern day fandom. You know, maybe you had it in comic books or Batman or something, but I don't know, I just think it took it to a whole new level. And I found this quote, and I picked it because it was like inherent, because it's like way over the top, but I think it just shows how impactful this movie was. This was a quote on Chris Stuckman's review of Star Wars, a YouTuber, and there's a guy, and he says, "I can tell you, as someone that was actually there at the theater when it was first released, there was no question life had changed for the human race from that moment on. Only movie I've ever been to that the audience gave it a standing ovation at the end. Everyone, and I do mean everyone, was completely blown away. Star Wars changed everything, not just cinema, but life itself would be different from that moment on. The way we looked at each other, the way we looked at purpose, the way we looked at Earth, it united the world in a way that has never been duplicated and stands today as the new Bible from which billions have based their beliefs and taken their moral compass. It was truly life-changing event." And I don't think he was joking. Like,
no,
you know, and
scary that he wasn't.
yeah, it really is. I mean, but you know, it just shows how impactful this film was. And I do have to say, when it's the best experience I've had at the movies in my life was seeing Episode 4, seeing this movie in the re-release in the theater. with fans that were dressed up in costume and whatever, and everyone just cheering. You know, even when multiple times, like when the iconic theme came on, you know, and everyone's cheering, and you know, I think that will probably be eclipsed come December. It's the best movie-going experience of my life, but it was just electric. I can't even imagine, having never ever even seen it or heard of anything in this world, what that would feel like. And anyway, okay, so let's get on to talking about the film. So, how do you? I'm going to go over each one of the characters, and we're going to talk about. Let's see here. Yeah, we just had a comment from. Oh, it doesn't say. Okay, sorry. Oh, from Joe. Joe Tufano. He says, "Hey guys, sorry I'm a bit late. But since you brought up that quote, I really wish I could have experienced this movie for the first time back in 1977. Yeah, I think we're all there. I can't even imagine how cool that must have been. Did your parents go to see it, and did they talk about it at all, or?
I honestly have no idea. My parents don't really care about Star Wars all that much.
Yeah, my parents are not into movies at all.
Yeah, my parents have seen them, but I don't know. I would find it likely that my dad probably. I don't know if either of them saw it in the theater. They've both seen the movies since, for sure. My dad's more of a Star Trek guy, though.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess there was that fandom with Star Trek. That's a good point.
It's really kind of like, for the people who were born in the 70s and even the 80s, it's really a defining movie for our generation. Like, I don't think that people who were older, who were at least adults, and that when it came out, I don't think it quite had the impact for them that it did for us as kids.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Sorry for laughing during the quote. I shouldn't. That wasn't respectful. But anyway, it's just so impactful. Okay, so anyway, we're going to go over each of the different characters. So it's going to be a little different this time than the other times. First, this is just the way that made sense to me. So Eric Joe says, I know my dad saw it in the theater with my grandma. My mom doesn't really care for Star Wars, unfortunately, but she did for a while at the time of Revenge of the Sith. That's really cool. I mean, this really is a great film to watch with an entire family.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that's really special about it, and I hope that they keep that in these new ones, that they don't get too dark, and there are things that you can still take the whole family to. But okay, so the first people I'm going to talk about, the first people we get introduced to, R2-D2 and C-3PO. And I guess your thoughts of them in this film and sort of your initial introduction to them. What do you think?
Well, I think they are really well done. I was talking to Abby about it during the film that, you know, especially R2-D2, for a character that has no actual lines, you care about that guy a whole lot, and he's able to communicate so much through beeps and boops. It's kind of amazing. And I think that, you know, if you contrast this a little bit with Episode 1, I mean, these guys are largely the source of the comic relief in the film, that and Chewbacca to some degree. And it's not over the top. It's just enough funny and just enough serious, and you know, it's really well done. And so looking at Episode 1, you know, we introduced Jar Jar, and we already know how I feel about Jar Jar. But I just feel like this is a really, you know, humor has always been a part of Star Wars, and it started with these guys. And I really love that they kind of have C-3PO as like the English butler kind of persona throughout. You know, I'm here to serve, and he's got the accent, and I don't know. I just thought it was hilarious.
He's got the kind of dry humor to go with that persona too.
Yeah. And then sometimes he's really quick on his feet. When they were on the Death Star, and at that point Han and Luke had left the droids alone to go after the Princess Leia, and the stormtroopers arrive, and C-3PO has come up with this great little story that they went that way, and you just it seems out of character, but a couple of times in the film he's got this story made up for why they are where they are, and gets them out of a little jam.
Yeah, I think that they actually kind of provide a lot of exposition for the film without providing exposition. There's a lot of times where he's kind of, where C-3PO is sort of worried about something or stressed out, and they kind of, somebody explains or he explains it to somebody else, or they're sort of in a way, I think, narrators a little bit of the whole saga. And so yeah, I really enjoyed them. So, okay, what do you think about Luke? That he starts out kind of a little bit whiny, a little bit the disgruntled teenager, but I think that's good. It shows sort of a character arc, and I really like the way that Luke he learns, like you were saying, learns little bit by little bit. I mean, he won't even really have any real training until Empire, until he meets Yoda, and I don't know, it just makes it really believable and makes you are rooting for this character so much.
This almost comes off as this is almost like Luke's trial of fire. Can you handle being a Jedi? Are you brave enough to do this? And it's kind of the boy to man transition that he makes. I think the whining early on is intentional to show he's kind of a kid. He's kind of a little weenie, and as he grows through the course of the movie, he grows into a man, and he's more confident and courageous, and he proves himself.
I agree.
Yeah, and there are I see a lot of parallels between Luke's beginning in Episode 4 and Anakin's beginning in Episode 1. They're both introduced to a world that they really don't know much about, though Anakin has kind of a sense of who the Jedi are, as he says, no one can kill a Jedi, so he had a little more knowledge about the world at that point. But with Luke, he does kind of have this whininess, but I was going to go to Tashi Station and pick up some power converters. And he kind of comes by it honestly, though, because now we've seen emo Anakin in Episode 2, and so you kind of get where Luke gets this stuff, and when he's kind of got this little thing for Leia, and Leia makes some remark about Han, saying, I wonder if he cares about anything, and she walks out, and Luke's like, I care. It's just so pathetic, honestly. But it's hilarious.
Well, that brings us up to talking about Leia, and I think if there's a weak character in this first movie, it's probably Leia. I think that the Carrie Fisher performance, she has sort of a weird accent that she does, and I mean, she's not in the movie that much. It's certainly doesn't prevent me from loving the film, but if we're really hard on the prequels for the acting, I think we gotta call a spade, that she's probably the weakest of the group. But she's she doesn't have as much character growth, or it doesn't have as much to do, I don't think, as the others. I don't know. What do you think about Leia?
I think it's a vast improvement over Padme in the last two films.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, she has a little bit of spunk. She has a little bit of spirit. So, you're right. She is a little bit kind of a weak character, not a super strong acting performance, not a super strong character arc. I mean, but I think it's okay. I think it's it works because some of the other characters are so strong that you don't notice it so much, and also in the context of the other film, it's just like, oh, you mean a woman who's not a total pathetic wimp? Nice.
Well, I thought it was funny. Almost every shot that you see of her, they start playing what I call Leia's theme. It's kind of this soft little, music, and it's just her theme, and just thought that was kind of funny. She is kind of the strong-willed modern woman. Like she doesn't take the crap of the men, and especially Han. Like they both just rub each other so much. It's just funny, the banter back and forth. But again, I don't know about personal growth. There aren't a ton of characters in the movie who demonstrate growth. I'd say Luke, possibly Han, but Han, we'll get on to him in a minute, I guess.
Yeah.
But Leia, I was happy with the performance overall. Did think the treatment was a little odd. I just don't get why the music every single time you see her. But she was a good, strong-willed woman anyway for the time. I think it was good.
Yeah, I mean, I still like her. I think she's the weakest of the group. But let's talk about Vader. And one of the things that I admit, I forgot that Vader is really kind of like third in command. In this, I mean, you've got the Emperor that we don't really hear much about here, but then you have Tarkin, and in my memory, I thought it was Vader that destroyed Alderaan, and it's not. It's Tarkin. Tarkin's the one who does it, and that, I don't know, that was just surprising to me. And I mean, you have somebody like Vader going out on these missions. Like if you were the head of the Empire, you're not going to be, in a fighter going on this mission like that. I don't know. It just surprised me that there's that aspect of him, and that he's not as a sort of head honcho as I remembered. I don't know, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing I noticed as well. I don't really know what a Grand Moff is. But he is clearly outranks Vader in this. So I'd love to hear the backstory on that. But it is, and I think partly it is because he was blown up. Tarkin was blown up on the station. So going forward, it is the Emperor #1 and Vader #2 again. So I think that may be why we remember Vader being the #2. But it is interesting to see Vader now, 20 years down the road. What's he doing now? And things have kind of been status quo. Empire continues to build. I liked they kind of refer to his hokey religion, and he force chokes the guy, and just kind of an interesting scene there. And they talk about dissolving, the old Republic, and the Senate has finally been dissolved completely. And they were, because previous to that, they'd been a little concerned about the senators, being upset that they might go another way. And so kind of interesting how the politics have hung around that long. But then finally the Emperor is just like, yeah, we're just going to disband that and call it good.
I think that having that part about the old religion and the Force and everything, I think it makes Vader a really complex character, more than he would be if he was just this horrible evil guy, which he is. But you have this backstory. Of course, we know the backstory, but it just adds this layer to him that makes it, I think, really interesting. I don't know. What do you think about Vader in this film, Abby?
Yeah, I noticed the same thing you did about him not quite being as high up on the chain of command as I originally was thinking. But I think that doesn't matter, because he shows the people who are in power over him his own power. And I think there's kind of this understanding that, well, we're going to kind of keep this guy happy because he can choke us from across the room. He has power that we can't even dream of having.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I had forgotten actually how much Vader is in this. Like, he has so many lines and things, and I had kind of forgotten that he was that present in the movie. It seems like the feel for him overall over the course of the movies is he's just kind of this looming bad guy that we know is there, but we don't see him a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too that in just 20 years, 20 years earlier, there was a Jedi temple and like, at least scores of Jedi around, and so you take something that's fairly ubiquitous in knowledge, and in just 20 years now, it's really a myth. They refer to it as a Hokild religion, or just things that like people have maybe heard of it, but nobody really believes it anymore. It's just amazing that they go in such a short time to that state. And you're watching the episode 7 trailers, and
Mm-hmm.
you have Han Solo talking about, oh yeah, it's all real, all of it, and they just said they'd heard stories, and then you see just how small this in episode 4, how small is the cast, and how small is really the galaxy-wide view of what's going on, and all the events of episodes 4 through 6. It's a fairly small cast of characters that interact with the whole thing that's going on, and how many would have heard that the Jedi were back necessarily from this event, because you've got maybe up to hundreds of Jedi 20 years ago, and it's a myth within 20 years. Well, what about going another 20 years forward, and there were only 2 or 3 Jedi at a time, so just kind of funny to compare those two states and where we might be coming up.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well, because I think it's 30 years in between Jedi and Force Awakens.
Okay.
I could be wrong about that, but yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit similar from what we've seen in this. So let's talk a little bit about Han Solo. Now, I guess my question do we like Han because he's sort of the bad guy? Girls love a bad guy. Or is it Harrison Ford's performance? I do have a quick quote from Joe here, our viewer. He says, "Luke and Han are my favorite Star Wars characters because, to paraphrase Peter Jackson, Luke is the one we all feel like at one point in life. Han is the kind of guy we all want to be. Leia, I think, is fine, but she gets better when she meets Han Solo." I think that is true. I like the quips between the two of them. They're fun. I don't know. What do you guys think is the appeal about Han? Is it kind of the bad guy that we like, or sort of the scoundrel?
I think it's more, to me, what's appealing about Han is the real casualty with the way that Harrison Ford plays him. Like, he doesn't take himself or anything else too seriously. He's sort of nonchalant and unassuming.
Well, he's just in it for the money. He says it. I'm in it for the money. I don't believe in this Force stuff. So he he's not as serious. All the other characters are pretty serious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, he's the cool friend that you had in high school that wasn't really afraid of anything, willing to try whatever, and just didn't care. I think all of us would love to just not really care at some point. But he just kind of embodies that cowboy attitude, like, bring it on, and I'm good with down for whatever happens. I just think it's just kind of a cool factor with him. But also, you don't exactly know. On the one hand, you kind of do know what you're getting with Han, but you also don't. Like, he's multifaceted in that respect, that you don't know which way he's going to come down, and that's kind of what's fun to watch. Is you don't really know what he's going to say, but you're really excited to hear him say it. So I think there's just something there.
I think a big piece of why we love Han so much, and we don't just think he's a big jerk, is the moment when he comes back and he saves Luke. He saves that guy's butt, and he had totally written it off like, I don't care about this. Like, this isn't my fight. This isn't my problem. I'm not going to risk myself for you guys. Like, no. And then he totally, apparently he has a conscience because he comes through. He realizes that they need him. And that's really, in the end, that's why we love him. That's why he's so cool.
Yeah, that's true.
And we'll get into this next time, but that's where he's so detached this time, and then at the end of the next episode, he's frozen in carbonite, and then you can see like the goodwill he's built up because he came back. Now he's got all sorts of people willing to put themselves at risk to save him, which at points of this episode that wouldn't have happened because he was so nope, not my problem.
That's a good point. He's very confident, and I think Harrison Ford is so great, that kind of role, whether it's playing the president or playing Indiana Jones or whatever, just being very confident. I mean, he has no doubt that that Princess Leia would, like he says, what are the chances of a guy like me getting with a princess? But he has no doubt that the princess would be into him. It's the question of her being a princess, I think. And so that's really fun. And I think that, I don't know, it's just he's always just sort of a breath of fresh air from all of the solemnness of some of the other characters. And so let's talk about.
Oh, can I jump in?
Oh yeah, please.
Probably my favorite moment with Han Solo is when they're on the Death Star and they've they're trying to make their escape at this point, and he sees a couple of stormtroopers coming his way, and he just starts yelling and running after them, and they run away. And so he chases them down the hall, screaming, and not even fired a shot at this point, but just running with his blaster. And then he runs into this room full of stormtroopers, and then he runs back the other way. And it's just a hilarious little segment but it just really shows his his scoundrel spirit. He's not afraid to be that guy to run ahead, but he also, it's in his nature to know when to cut loose and get out, and that's just part of him. But I just love that little sequence.
Well, and his friendship with Chewbacca, I think, is really wonderful in all these films too. I don't know, it's just really sweet and creative and different, and so I think it warms him up as well.
Yeah, well, he's got a kitty,
Yeah, that's right.
Really big kitty.
So how do you think the special effects hold up? They, of course, were groundbreaking, nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. I mean, a lot of people, this film, I think, was nominated for 8 Academy Awards back in 1977, and it started George Lucas on the path of industrial light and design, and I mean, special effects flat out would not be where they are without Star Wars. It changed. It was just a deal breaker, and I think that they did. I think they hold up. I think they still look really good. It's not one that you're like, boy, I can see, see the sort of the strings on the on the models or whatever. I don't know. What do you guys think?
All in all, it looks great. Occasionally you can see a little bit of the behind the scenes work, but all in all, it looks really good. I think the only thing that really stood out to us that we chuckled about were the computer graphics, of like the Death Star plans and of the Death Star exploding on their on their computer screen model. And so just a couple of things like that that just kind of date it, because back in 1977, that was the end all be all of computer graphics. It looked, that's what it was.
Yeah.
But aside from just looking dated in that respect, I think all the special effects still hold up.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we had a great comment from Joe here. He says, my favorite moment with Han is when he tries to cover up their shootout in the prison area, and when it doesn't work, he shoots the radio saying, it was a boring conversation anyway.
Yeah, I like that scene too, and he's just like, "Oh, we had a malfunction, but we're all fine here. How are you?" You know, he's so great at just kind of coming up with what to do on the fly, even if it's not working.
Yeah, that really is a good one. Okay, so my next question was, there's a pretty long segment where they're in that trash compactor. What do you think of that scene? Do you like it? Not like it? I don't know. Does it work for you?
I think there's a lot of humor in it.
Yeah.
So it really works for me. When I think of this movie, that's one of the big things that comes to mind is the trash compactor scene and them trying kind of scrambling and freaking out and then they actually get R2 to turn it off and
3PO.
and 3PO's and C3PO is like freaking out. He thinks they're dead when they're celebrating, and it's just funny.
Yeah.
I just wish in that scene that Luke hadn't said, "Where could he be?" So many times. You know, like everybody else is really trying hard to stabilize the room or get something to jam it, and he's kind of on his little radio talking to C3PO, yelling at him, and just over and over and over. 3PO! Oh, where could he be? Just over and over and over. Even as a kid, I was wondering why do they keep a monster in their trash compactor thing, and where are they coming up with all this metal junk? Like, I don't know. It's just kind of an odd little place, and why is there water in there? And a lot of good questions for me, but I really like the scene. You're just putting people in a high-pressure situation, and you've got a couple of really strong personalities between Leia and Han, and it works as a kind of a way to get to know their personalities, because usually you're going to get to know a person really when they're in the middle of a conflict or high-stress situation, and that's when you really figure out who they are. So I like the scene.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's a lot of fun. Let's see. Joe says, did anybody notice the stormtrooper banging his head on the door right before the other stormtroopers? Oh, I know what he's talking about. Find C-3PO and R2. Yeah, that's a famous error in the movie where he's walking. The stormtrooper is coming, and there's a doorway with a panel or whatever, and he bangs the top of his head on the panel. But anyway,
I watched for that.
I never noticed that.
Yeah. So I do notice it now. Once somebody pointed it out to me, I did notice. Okay, so I only have a couple more questions actually. So Obi-Wan tells Vader, quote, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than anything you could have imagined. And so I guess, what does he mean by that? And did you feel like Obi-Wan gave up? Because he looks at Luke, and then he looks at Vader, and then he literally puts down his saber, and he's gone. And I don't know. So what did you think about that scene?
That was weird. Personally, I just didn't really. I don't know. I just thought it was weird. Why did he disappear? I don't know. I just thought it was strange and unexplained and just kind of hanging there.
Well, I'm glad we're getting on to Obi-Wan, because he's really, he's the source of our knowledge as we go along with Luke. He's the one that's teaching Luke about the Force and about this whole thing, and so you start to get the build up from Owen and Beru saying, they refer to him as an old wizard who's probably dead already. But then you combine that with the message on R2-D2 that he's their only hope, and you're like, okay, so this guy is really important, and so and then the magician thing or wizard thing, you're like, oh, okay, so he's got some sort of powers, so let's see what that's about. But that's the whole thing in this movie, and I think that's where you get power. Is they never really answer all the questions about the Force and being a Jedi, and it's really treated well between both Vader's powers and Obi-Wan's powers, and this is just another one of those things, that leaves you with a question, is like, why? I don't see it as giving up, especially in the context of where we're left after Episode 3, and Yoda teaches Obi-Wan about how to commune with the Force and commune with Qui-Gon specifically. And then we see in the later episodes, so we'll actually see their spirit representations as they're one with the Force. But it seems like getting struck down by evil is kind of a shortcut to this being one with the Force. And so I think this is an intentional act, not of giving up, but knowing the power that he can have from the other side. Because he's now had 20 years to commune with Qui-Gon as he's in his hermitage on Tatooine, and he knows, and I suspect that Qui-Gon has been this, voice from the beyond for Obi-Wan in this time, and he knows he can be that for Luke, and even it will be more powerful for Luke than if he's able to stay by his side. And I think he's kind of an old man at this point, and it's just funny to watch the lightsaber battles now in Episode 4, because at the time when we were growing up, they were really intense, but now we've seen, what they were like when these guys were young, and they're, flipping around and spinning and all this stuff. But now they're a couple of old guys, really, and the lightsaber battles aren't as flashy, I guess. But I don't see it as giving up. I see him kind of fulfilling his destiny in his mind, and that's why at the end he just holds that lightsaber up and allows Vader to strike him down, because as he told Vader, you can strike me down, I'm just going to become more powerful than you can ever imagine. And then he's able to become kind of Luke's spirit guide going forward.
I hadn't thought about that with the, Qui-Gon, being a spiritual guide to Obi-Wan, and how he could, we see that in the next couple scenes, that he is the spiritual guide for Luke. And I also think maybe part of it too was he knew that this sacrifice would be the final sort of tipping point for Luke to be able to do the brave things that he does, later on, that was going to inspire him, anger him, all of that, and to get him to really, hate Vader, and just get this passion that you might not have had otherwise.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that earlier as we were talking about Luke. He is different from Anakin in that I really feel that if Owen and Beru weren't killed, Luke wouldn't have gone down this path. Because as much as he wanted to go to Tashi Station, he was still this was his life, and he's very loyal. He was very loyal. He was going to stay in it because he already had. They had said most of his friends had gone away already. But he was going to stay out of a sense of loyalty, and he'd even refused Obi-Wan until they were dead. And so I do feel like that's what it took to propel him into this, was really having the other life was taken away. And so, but then he was willing to go forward when it was.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so then we get to the final segment of the film, which, they gather the squadron together, and they view the plans of the Death Star, and they then have this attack that they have. And, it is a little bit silly that, you design an entire planet, basically, that can be undone by 2 shots into the port, but it really works, I think, as far as pacing and excitement, and I don't know, just the whole segment to me, by the end, every time I see it, I just want to cheer and woohoo! And I think it's real like space opera at that point. Like that's the section that's the most, just kind of, it just makes you want to cheer. I don't know. What do you guys think about that whole sort of segment?
Well, and you have, on the one hand, I agree with you that it's funny that they would leave, that type of flaw and that it could be taken down by such a small ship. But there's also a lot of pride there. You look at Tarkin's reaction, and he's got a staffer who comes to him and says, we looked at their attack pattern, and there is a problem. There's a possibility that they can succeed here, and Tarkin's just like, no way. We're not gonna. This is our moment of triumph. We're not running away now, and there's no. Basically, he doesn't believe there's any way they could take out his beloved space station. But and so I think that's part of it is they, even if they acknowledge there was the flaw, they don't think anybody's going to be able to carry it out, and even if. Even the other rebel fighters didn't believe that it could be done until Luke said, "Oh yeah, this is easy stuff." That hitting a target that small at that speed, and so I think on both sides they felt like it was an impossibility, except for really Luke.
Well, and really, I mean, to get to it, you had to go to the belly of the beast. You had to go right into the Empire's territory, and that they're loaded up with all kinds of firepower. So even though it seems like a simple idea to shoot this little thing, it wasn't exactly easy to get to it.
Mm-hmm. And a big
That's
thing
true.
in the treatment of the Death Star, this came out of those videos we mentioned last time about what if Episode 2 were good. I really wish that all the stuff that happened on Naboo in the prequels had happened on Alderaan. Because when Alderaan is blown up, you feel a little bit bad, and they do make the most of it, I think, with Obi-Wan saying that he felt their voices suddenly silenced. But I feel like it would have been such a more emotional thing for us if it had been Naboo being blown up, and if Leia had been from there. But we know Naboo from the prequels, and so I feel like there is a disconnect between because we just have no attachment to Alderaan. But anyway, I do love the ending. And you have the kind of David versus Goliath scenario of these little X-wing fighters going up against this Death Star that can blow up an entire planet. And really good build-up because they've discovered the Rebel base by following the Millennium Falcon. I still question how fast the Death Star can move because it looks like it moves fairly slowly on film, but then they catch up to the Millennium Falcon in a pretty quick amount of time, I felt. And then it takes them forever to get around the planet. But it's kind of funny. But I really love the build-up and again the small fighters versus this giant battle station. Pretty cool.
I agree. I think it is so satisfying. And, this is... I made a list of if I was going to introduce somebody to movies, somebody who had never seen a single movie, and I had to pick 10 films to introduce somebody to movies, this would be on that film because it's so important and so groundbreaking, but it just makes you feel good and it's exciting. And like you're saying, the underdog story is just, and there's a great villain and several layers of great villains, really, when you think about it. And you've got the great character of Han, who's so fun. You've got C-3PO and R2-D2, and you've got Leia, and you have Luke, who you're rooting for, of course, is the hero of the story. So it's just a great movie. So that would be kind of my final sort of words on it. It's one of the ones I think I would probably take on a desert island if I could only take 3-4 movies. I would take Star Wars Episode 4.
If you're looking at under 10 movies, how many Star Wars movies are you going to put on the list? Could you do 4 without 5?
Yeah, I mean, I just picked 4, but in reality, I would want to pick 4, 5, and 6. But for the sake of the, although I did cheat on Lord of the Rings, I picked all three, so I guess I could pick all three. But yeah, it's just such a great movie. I love it. I don't know, do you have any finishing thoughts on it?
My last thought is just, as I'm watching this, I kind of wondered, would this, I think George Lucas, when he made this, I think there was a real sense of, I have these limitations. I have a low budget for what I'm trying to do. I'm not well known enough yet to just get someone to pick it up, so I kind of have to work to get someone to buy into it and fund me here. And I have to wonder if the movie would have been as good if he didn't have those limitations.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I almost forgot. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I almost forgot to talk about the music. How can we not talk about the music? I mean, one of the greatest themes, and it's great music just as instrumental music.
Yeah. Without
even being part of them. I mean, he was so lucky. I mean, can you imagine what it must have been like for George Lucas to be, in his initial screening with John Williams and hear that, be like, oh my gosh, that is going to play in my movie. It must have been insane. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think that was a really good choice, especially for the time, to go with just this classical music soundtrack rather than, when they're loading up the Rebel Squadron. I was talking to Abby. I was like, now's when they should be playing Danger Zone, and it totally felt like a Top Gun moment as they're getting ready. But going with kind of the classical soundtrack was a really good move, and adds to kind of the feeling of the whole series. I really like John Williams. I think he has just an amazing gift to write themes for movies in general. Like, just so impressive when you like, you can listen to like John Williams' greatest hits and you instantly are connected to the emotion of the movie it came from. Doesn't really matter which movie it was. He just has a gift.
Yeah, I don't know how anyone could deny that. I mean, he's the best.
I don't know what were his first like breakthrough movies as far as writing scores for movies?
I don't know. I know that he's won more Academy Awards than any other, except for Walt Disney. I think Walt Disney earned more, but I don't know.
Because I'm wondering if this was one of his, one of the movies that made John Williams John Williams.
I think it had to be one of his first. Let's see. I'm just looking. It looks like there were a few. He was involved in the scoring. He won his first Oscar in 1971 for adaptation and original song score of Fiddler on the Roof. I didn't know that.
Wow.
Yeah, Poseidon Adventure, Jaws. That's probably how George Lucas went with him. Would be my guess. But there was, and he did win the Oscar for Jaws as well. So he had already won 2 Oscars. So he was, but still.
I do know that he basically, this type of orchestra, it's not a traditional orchestra, it's a variation on an orchestra. And he basically invented this type of score. He basically invented this type of orchestra and this type of movie music.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it looks like he started with Steven Spielberg with Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then Spielberg actually recommended John Williams to George Lucas.
That would make sense.
That does make. I think they're pretty good friends. So.
Yeah, but they have, and even throughout the movie, you have like Luke's theme and Leia's theme and the main Star Wars theme, and you've got later we're going to get the Imperial March, and just so many memorable themes that when you just hear it, you're instantly back right there in the movie, feeling what you felt. Just so powerful.
But it's not one of those scores, though, where the music is telling you what to feel.
Right.
Like, I didn't like in Lincoln, which was John Williams. I didn't like how I felt like that movie, the music was telling you, oh, I got to feel excited at this moment. I've got to, you know, I mean, it's a good movie, but that bothered me. You know, it's like, it's just so good. And Joe here, he has a comment about the score. He says, my favorite themes from this movie are obviously the main title sequence, the Cantina song, which is so great, and also the music that plays during the TIE fighters attacking the Falcon and the ending throne room sequence. So yeah, I agree. Those are great. Okay.
Yeah, I think from what you were saying, he does a really good job of conveying the emotions you're already feeling rather than altering your emotion during the film through the music.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you're watching something and then the music gets creepy and you're like, oh, I need to be creeped out. You know, something bad's going to happen. But he just kind of takes the emotion that you're naturally feeling at that moment and just kind of reinforces it with his song.
Yep. I agree. All right. I think that's all I had for talking about this film. And we will talk about most people, I think, feel, I'd say the majority of Star Wars fans feel The Empire Strikes Back is the best of the series. It's, I think, the best made. For me, this one is actually the original Star Wars is still my favorite just because I get so into that. I just have so much fun with it. But it's so well made. And so it'll be really fun. It has a different director than the other films. And so it'll be, I think, a lot of fun to talk about next week.
Cool.
So if you guys want to give your Twitters or your, you know, ways that you can follow you, real quick.
You can catch me at Abby_Kid on Twitter. Our website is jeremyandabbyadopt.wordpress.com.
And
I'm Jeremy_Kid at Twitter.
Great, and you can follow me at SmilingLDSGirl on all social medias. And thanks so much, you guys. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay, so we'll see you next week.
Alrighty.
And thanks to Joe for contributing so much. I really appreciate all your comments.
Thank you.